Chapter 16. A Scare. Back at the ranch, the Hollisters and the Vegas waited anxiously for Pete, Pam, and Dolores to return. They had eaten supper and were sitting in the patio looking toward the mountains. Diego was softly strumming his guitar in an effort to ease the nervous tension the families felt. Truchas had come over and wore a worried look. "The children should have been home long ago," Mrs. Hollister said, a note of fear in her voice. "I'm going to telephone Bishop's Ranch and ask Mrs. Moore whether Helen and Jack have returned." Before she had a chance to, Holly exclaimed, "Here they come! I hear their horses!" Diego stopped strumming, and everybody listened to the hoofbeats, which sounded in the distance. Presently, the dim figures of the animals came into view in a cloud of dust. "Hooray!" Ricky yelled. But suddenly gasps went up from the patio as the horses drew nearer. The saddles were empty. Diego hurried over and grabbed Spot's bridle. "He's come a long distance," the boy said, noting how the horse was sweating. Truchas examined the horse further and saw that Spot had thrown his shoe and had sticker burrs on his hock. "This means bad luck," the old man said gravely. "These stickers grow only where the monster dwells." "What do you mean by that?" Mr. Hollister demanded, noticing a look of fright come over Diego's face. Truchas told him of the strange mountain that made noises and said the horse doubtless had come from that direction. Mr. Hollister sighed. This sounded like a fairy tale which he would not worry about, but he was much concerned for the children's safety nevertheless. It was Mrs. Vega who relieved the tension. "Dolores is a mighty sensible girl," she remarked, "and her daddy has taught her how to camp overnight in an emergency. Like as not, the horses just ran away, and we'll have to go fetch the children. If they're not back by morning, we'll go to the Burr country, monster or no monster." "I'll call Bishop's Ranch now," Mrs. Hollister said, and went inside to telephone. After a brief conversation with Mrs. Moore, she hung up and reported that neither Jack nor Helen had returned. "But their horses didn't come back," Mrs. Hollister said. "It's very strange. Do you think we'd better notify the police?" The Vegas, though somewhat worried, said there would be no use to do this because a night search would be nearly impossible. "Let's not worry any more until tomorrow morning," Truchas said philosophically, starting off for his shack. After he had gone, Mrs. Hollister took Sue to her room, and Holly and Ricky also went to bed. When they said their prayers, they asked that all the children out on the range be taken care of safely during the night, and returned to them the next day. After everything was quiet, Sue slipped out of her bed and went to where Holly was dozing off. "Don't worry," she told her sister. "Leave them alone and they'll come home wagging their tails behind them." Holly reached over and kissed the little girl, and Sue quickly climbed into bed with her. Later that evening, when Mrs. Hollister was ready to retire, she went to look at each of her children. Coming to Holly's bed, she found the sisters snuggled close together, with Sue holding one of Holly's pigtails in her chubby hand. Quietly, Mrs. Hollister carried the baby of the family back to her own bed. Morning dawned bright and sunny, but since the travelers had not returned, it seemed gloomy to the Hollisters and the Vegas. Diego got his father's binoculars, and climbing to the roof of their barn, scanned the countryside in all directions. The children were not in sight. "We'll have to act now and act fast," Mr. Hollister said with determination. "Frank, is your plane in shape to start a search?" "Not quite," Mr. Vega replied nervously. "I'm going to continue repairing it immediately." He hurried to the barn, swung open the door, and set to work feverishly. As he did, he called back to Mr. Hollister, suggesting that he and Diego go searching with Truchas and take the missing children's horses with them. "I'll scout in the air as soon as I get the propeller and wheel fixed," he promised. At once, Ricky said he wanted to go with his father, and Holly begged to be permitted to join the trip. Mrs. Hollister, smiling a little sadly, said, "I'm going along too." It's very rough riding out there, Mr. Vega warned her. But I'll not stay here while my son and daughter are missing, she told him resolutely. Mrs. Vega put an arm around Mr. Hollister's shoulders. I know how you feel, she said bravely. Go by all means. I'll stay here and tend to the house. Somebody might telephone with information about the children. I want to go too, Sue pleaded, tugging at her mother's hand. But it was decided she was too small for such a long ride on horseback, and would stay at home with Mrs. Vega. When the little girl started to cry, the kindly woman said, Wouldn't you like to play house with the rabbits? Sue dried her eyes, then went to the kitchen to help put breakfast on the table. 20 minutes later, while Diego and Truchas were saddling and bridling the horses, Mrs. Hollister and Holly helped Mrs. Vega quickly pack sandwiches and tomato juice for the riders. I know you want to hurry, she said. I do hope you'll have good luck. As they rode in twos across the range, it was not hard to follow the hoofprints that Spot, Pal, and Cutie had made the evening before. But finally they became lost in a maze of cattle tracks. The party rode all morning without stopping. Then Truchas said they must rest the horses. We'll eat our lunch while we're waiting, Mrs. Hollister said, although she hated to lose a precious moment. There's a nice shady grove of pine trees ahead, Diego said. Let's go there. As they approached the trees, Ricky suddenly spurred his horse forward. What's the matter? Holly shouted. I see something white, the boy replied without explaining further. Before the others could catch up to him, he had reined in and hopped off his horse. Excitedly, he approached a clump of rabbit brush. Suddenly, from it came a loud rattling noise. Be careful, Diego cried out. It's a snake. Ricky jumped back in time. The vicious fangs of a rattlesnake struck out toward him, missing the boy's leg by inches. The child was so startled he could not move. The snake coiled to strike again. Seeing Ricky's danger, Diego leaped from his horse, picked up a stone, and flung it at the rattler. It was a perfect hit, and the snake lay still. Oh, thank you, Diego, Ricky said. Then he pointed to something white in the rabbit brush. That's what I wanted you to look at. Diego reached in and pulled out a narrow piece of white rabbit fur. A few broken stitches were attached to it. I'll bet it's off the cowboy suits Pete and Pam have on, Ricky told him. A clue, Mr. Hollister said happily. Well, at least we're on the right track. The group spread out and looked to the left and right as they worked their way slowly up a small hill. When they reached the top of it, Diego pointed excitedly to the valley below. People, he exclaimed. They were too far away to be recognized, but the searchers hoped they were the missing children. If not, at least they might have seen them. Come on, let's get to those people before they disappear, Mr. Hollister urged. Truchas mumbled something about Burr country and the monster, but fortunately Diego did not hear him. The riders went on as fast as they dared. Soon they lost sight of the group in the distance, as the makeshift trail took them into a green valley, then through another patch of woodland. I'm afraid they'll be gone, Mrs. Hollister murmured nervously as the minutes ticked away. Then suddenly there was a clear view ahead. Across an open stretch of range stood 4 children, Pam, Dolores, Helen, and Jack. We found them, Ricky cried, and gave a war whoop call to attract their attention. The children heard it and came running toward the riders. When they met, everybody started talking at once. We're so glad you came. How did you know where to find us? What happened to you? But the Hollisters' first question was, Where's Pete? He's gone, Pam reported sadly. Pete disappeared last night and he hasn't come back.